I've got a barbershop theory.
When it comes to chords and harmonies, the barbershop style has a strict set of guidelines as to what chords are considered part of the barbershop harmonic language, both when it comes to the preservation of the style itself, but also when it comes to contests. This set of chords is also what barbershop arrangers and judges look for when deciding whether or not a chart is considered contestable. And the choice of chords have a strong influence on the score a musicality judge gives at contests. Use too many non-vocabulary chords and you could be in for a shock when the scores are announced. In this video, we're going to take a look at the standard chords and harmonies of the barbershop style, as well as looking at some of the newer and not-so-consonant chords found in contemporary barbershop. For every chord, I will show you how to tune each interval using just intonation, as well as some alternatives where just intonation gets us into deep waters. Let's begin by looking at the official judging handbook. In here, it says barbershop harmony uses the following chords. While brief and musically appropriate use of out-of-vocabulary chords is allowed, this may result in a lower score due to diminished consonants. And this is a very important factor to keep in mind throughout this video. The major triad. Most chords in barbershop are major chords, so it's good to familiarize yourself with this one. Dominant 7th. Classic, and you all know this one. Dominant 9th. This is another classic barbershop chord, and you can find this everywhere in barbershop. A classic example is Rob Campbell's arrangement of Once Upon a Time, sung by Keepsake. It comes in two versions, a rootless version and one where we omit the fifth. Interestingly enough, the two versions aren't considered equal when it comes to scoring. The rootless version sits as the second most important chord when talking consonance potential, whereas the other comes in fifth place alongside diminished chords, major 7 chords, etc. This is something I didn't know before researching for this video, and as an arranger, singer, and conductor, this is for sure something to take note of when choosing songs for contest use. Major add 9. Probably considered one of the most beautiful chords in barbershop, the major add 9 chord is really special. This has become more and more popular over the years as an embellishment, and you can find this chord everywhere in modern barbershop. The minor chord. When talking minor chords and just intonation, I find it very difficult to agree on how to tune different chords. This is of course a question of personal preference, but also a question of practical use versus mathematical correctness. But I find that the chord sounds better and more natural at around +7 cents. Let me know in the comments how you usually tune minor chords. Major 6. The major 6 chord can be surprisingly difficult to tune. It comes in two forms. One where all notes are represented, a true 6th chord if you will, and an empty version with doubled root with no 5th. This is typically used as a transition chord to a dominant 7th. Or as an embellishment in a lot of tags, typically featured in the baritone part. The major augmented chord. The major chord with an augmented 5th is, despite its somewhat dissonant sound, part of the official chord vocabulary, and it can be very difficult to tune as well. This is because the chord lacks pure or perfect intervals like fifths or fourths to help stabilize it. Instead, it's made up from two major thirds. This is called a symmetrical chord because it's made up from the exact same intervals. This chord is typically used instead of the dominant 7th. We usually only use this chord when the augmented note is required because of the melody, or if it's important to the original composition. The reason being that it ranks 5th place on the consonance potential scale found in the official judging handbook. The major 7 chord. Although this chord is part of the chord vocabulary, it sits in the 5th spot as well when it comes to the level of consonants. This means that although the chord is allowed to use in contest, overuse will probably affect your score. Minor 6. Here it is, the second most important chord in barbershop, and you no longer have to just take my word for it. The judging handbook says it too. This chord is very indicative of the barbershop style and sound. This is also one of those chords that can be tuned differently depending on the situation. If we follow just intonation, the minor third should be plus 16 and the major sixth should be plus 19. To me, this sounds alright. But imagine this scenario. If we go from C minor 6 to F dominant 7th, that would mean that the note E flat would have to change from plus 16 to minus 31, which is almost half a semitone. And since musicality judges listen for consonants when scoring, this could pose a problem. Although both chords respectively sound very consonant, in context it sounds dissonant because it sounds like the tonal center shifts momentarily. If we instead treat it more like a rootless 9 chord, we can move more freely between the two chords. Minor minor 7. The minor minor 7 chord is really difficult to tune, and there's a few ways to go about it. You can view it as a perfect 5th and a perfect 4th stacked on top of each other, depending on the voicing, of course. Another way is to look at it as a major 6 chord, so C minor minor 7 becomes E flat 6. Again, we run into a similar problem when we put the chord into context. There's a lot of 2 to 5 movement in barbershop, and here's how that would sound if we strictly stick to just intonation. Again, the tenor has to do a lot of traveling, but you can also notice both lead and baritone needing to adjust a fair amount in order to lock the 5 chord. A compromise could be to keep the perfect 4th between the lead and tenor, but to flatten both notes, still keeping the 2 cents difference between them. In this example, the tenor now only travels from minus 11 cents to minus 31. And since the lead is minus 13 cents on the note B flat, and the next one is A, the major third, which should be tuned minus 14 cents, it sounds more natural because the jump isn't as big as before. Full diminished chord. I don't think I've ever heard a full diminished chord ring like that. This is another symmetrical chord. 3 minor thirds stacked on top of each other. This is another situation where just intonation might sound a bit too mathematical to some people. Minor major 7. This is rarely seen in contest barbershop, but when it does occur, it's usually only an embellishment. Again, like with all minor chords, I believe it's a matter of taste. We can tune the intervals according to just intonation, but to many this sounds off. Instead, we can do like we did with the minor minor 7 to minor 6 chord and flatten the minor third as the lead changes its note. Minor at 9. The same applies to minor at 9 chords. Just intonation to me simply sounds a bit off because of how sharp the minor third is tuned. In this situation, I would tune the minor third plus 7 and the add 9 plus 4. Major 13. Sweet. This chord is used in contestable barbershop, but it is rare. It was famously used in Genie with the light brown hair, and back then, as far as I know, it had never been seen on the contest stage before.
Sweet.
In this example, I used the 13th the same way I would tune a major 6 chord, minus 16 cents. To conclude, I hope this video will both help you tune different chords more easily, as well as getting an insight in how different chords are valued by barbershop judges. But more importantly, I hope this video shows the drawbacks and limitations of just intonation. Blindly following a tuning system is hardly never the answer. So I highly encourage you to experiment with these chords, especially the different minor chords, and figure out which tuning method works best for you and your group. That's all for this video, and I will see you in the next one.